What's up, scholars? Welcome back to week 4. It's Doc and it's Motivational Monday. Now, I know, normally I would have started out the day with a lovely little message and a video sample early in the wee hours of the morning, but this week I'm switching it up a little bit and I'm presenting my message to you on the late night shift. And I'm also doing it podcast style. So no video, just me and my lovely voice putting our communication skills into practice. Now, I'm choosing to do this on the night shift, not because I just got tired or lazy, but because this morning I was actually being a public speaker. I put on a workshop on the Oceanside campus in honor of Black History Month on the topic of code switching as a communication practice. It was a really awesome experience. I got to present with one of our deans, Dr. Wendy Stewart, and one of our Emoja counselors, Mr. Don Love, and the three of us engaged with an audience of about 15, 16, 17 people who came out to hear about kind of the cultural practices of code switching. It was a really great experience, and next time I think I'm going to be a little bit better about publicizing when I am speaking on campus, so that perhaps if you have some availability and want to come and see me speak in person, you can come and join me. So I'm super pumped up about tonight's topic. Tonight we're talking about co-creating success. What are the best practices for giving and receiving constructive feedback? This is a super important part of the speech-making process, one that I think gets neglected by public speakers, especially novice public speakers who might have a little bit of anxiety about hearing or receiving feedback from others, even though I think it is fundamental to our growth as speakers and as communicators across different social situations. So tonight, I'll take you through 3 areas. First, I'll talk to you about the fears of feedback. Second, I'll talk to you about some motivations for seeking out feedback. And then finally, I'll end our conversation with some tips for offering constructive feedback, both in the general sense and more specifically on our upcoming assignments. So let's talk a moment about these fears of feedback. Why do we fear feedback? I humbly admit that I fear feedback. It's something that I have to be very intentional about, seeking out feedback, actually wanting to hear someone's opinions about my work. And mostly, this might be the artist in me, but I really think this is just the human in me, but I'm sensitive about my ish. Right? I've intentionally built and constructed whatever it is that I'm ready to present to the world, whether it's a speech in this instance, or an art piece, or an essay that I've written. And the feedback that I get is going to unpack and undo all of those ideas to a point where I feel vulnerable, where I know that my emotional intelligence is going to be triggered in some way, shape, or form. So, there are a couple different reasons that people fear giving and receiving feedback. And part of that is rooted in this vulnerability that we have. And this stems from judgment. It stems from perceptions of otherness. It stems from people not accepting us for who we are, or misinterpreting the messages that we offer, the intention behind our own meaning. Another thing that is a challenge is when we have a difference in opinion. We have to ask ourselves in this kind of moment of receiving feedback, well, should we defend ourselves? Or should we kind of just take in the information like a sponge and then let go the parts that we don't really think are useful in our development? Or do we steep with that, and does it stay with us? We have to remember that the feedback that we give, it does stay with the receivers. So when we offer our opinions to others, sometimes those opinions will just roll off like water and it won't mean that much. Maybe they didn't internalize what it is that you said. But there are many times that people are sensitive. We do internalize the ideas and the opinions of others, and we change our behaviors and we change our actions based upon that type of feedback. So these can lead to many types of anxieties and many vulnerable feelings and emotions about maybe I just maybe I just shouldn't. Maybe I just shouldn't. Maybe I would be better just working on it by myself, knowing that I put in hard work and then presenting it and it will go the way that it will go, without actually seeing if the choices that you're making are smart choices, are choices that are effective, that will receive the type of outcome that you're aiming for. Those are big challenges to overcome. But there are also real motivations for seeking out feedback. Feedback has some positive backings to it. Feedback can be the seed, the soil that helps you to grow and to develop your skill set so that you actually have a number of different tools that you can utilize in multiple different situations and contexts. So I urge us to actually seek out the feedback of others. And sometimes that feedback can be on a personal level in terms of our interpersonal relationships. Sometimes it could be on a professional level in terms of trying to see how you can move up the corporate ladder and where you can strengthen your possibilities for achieving that level of success. You might want to seek out your social capital and seek out your higher ups to say, hey, where can I improve? These are all reasons for us to actually be motivated to seek out feedback. In fact, I'm going to offer you 4 key reasons why you should seek out feedback. First, you might be able to see a different view of yourself. Most of us are hard workers. Most of us don't go into a situation without thinking things out a little bit, if not thoroughly. Especially if we have a little bit of maturity under our belt. If we've slipped and made mistakes in the past, then we do things with a lot of intention. So sometimes our intention becomes this tunnel view where we don't actually see anything but what we put in our path ahead of us. And seeking out the feedback of others allows us to see what we are doing from an alternative viewpoint. It gives us a vision of ourselves from the viewpoint of another. And that can, secondly, gain clarity about whether or not your message and the meaning behind your message is actually reaching its true intent. Are you saying what you want to say? And is it being received and interpreted by your audience in the same way? That type of feedback is invaluable. Seeking out others to gain clarity about the meaning of your message is invaluable. The third thing that is positive about seeking out feedback is your ability to test performance choices and audience response. Here's a perfect opportunity for you to say, let me test this joke out to see if people get it. Let me figure out if this gesture works right here and I can make it appear comfortable, conversational, and yet intentional. Testing the performance choices and gaining audience feedback and seeing how they respond helps to prepare you for any situation or any improvisational moment in the actual performance itself. So if you're giving a major presentation in front of 100 coworkers, you will want to test out your performance choices and your audience strategies just to make sure that your message is being received the way that you want it to be received. Finally, the fourth thing is winning and identifying growing areas. So here's where you can actually hear from your audience, from somebody outside of yourself, where you're winning. There's compliments that come with feedback. When you're doing well and the work you're putting in is actually paying off, your audience member that you're inviting to give you feedback is going to tell you that. They're going to say, wow, I really love how you took your time to pause and let me think about this question in this part of your speech because it made me feel like fill in the blank here. So winning and gaining confidence from the compliments on your successes is definitely one reason to seek out feedback. And finally, and this part is what makes us vulnerable, but identifying those weak areas, identifying those areas to grow, that helps you to invest more soil and that skill so that you can continue to grow and develop and expand on your strategies in that specific area. So those are 4 different motivations for seeking feedback. 1, you get to see a different view of yourself. 2, you gain clarity about the meaning of your message. 3, you can test performance choices and avoidance responses. And then 4, you can see where you're winning and areas where you need to grow. Those are 4 key motivations for seeking out feedback. Now let's talk tips for offering constructive feedback and for receiving constructive feedback. First, offering constructive feedback. Here are 5 key tips that are fairly universal, but if you actually implement these, can be super, super, super resourceful in helping you to actually have your feedback received with a warm embrace rather than a prickly porcupine response. 5 tips for offering constructive feedback. First, be specific. Be specific about what you see that needs assistance or help. Use examples. Identify specific areas within the speech. I really like during main point number 2 how you use 2 specific examples. However, the explanation was weak because I didn't necessarily see the connection between the claim and example number 1. Be specific. Tip number 2, be relevant. If your speaker has asked you to give feedback in these 2 areas, then be relevant. Give your feedback towards those 2 areas because that's what the type of feedback that they're seeking. Don't go off into Never Never Land and give them feedback on areas that you think that they need to improve upon unless you have asked them if they would like to receive that feedback. And that's something that is a super respectful tool and resource. It's just simply asking and respecting the answer. Asking and respecting the answer. Do you want to hear my feedback on this area as well? And if they say yes, then give it. And if they say no, then keep your response and your feedback and your ideas to yourself because they're not in the headspace to actually receive that feedback in an intentional and open and responsive way. Number 3, be honest and be transparent about where your feedback is coming from. Now, I teach public speaking and we're talking about giving feedback to public speakers, but I think that in general, when you give constructive feedback to anyone, being honest and being transparent about your intentions of where that feedback is coming from helps them to see whether or not they should actually take your advice to heart. In an interpersonal relationship, if someone doesn't trust you and doesn't believe that you're motivated from a space of safe, embracing invitational warmness where you are giving that from a place of love and a place of hope and a place of actual growth, even if it is in a moment of conflict, then they're not going to actually want to implement the changes that you're offering up. So when you offer up your feedback, it's really falling on false ears because they're not actually open enough to receive and hear the feedback that you would like them to actually receive and hear. So be honest and be transparent about where your feedback is coming from. This leads to trust and helps to create a sense of responsiveness and a sense of openness from whoever is receiving your feedback. Fourth tip, be respectful. Sometimes in our criticism and in our feedback, we can be a little kitschy, rude, insulting, rather than constructive. I'm not saying that everything has to be complimentary, but I am saying be careful of the language choices that you use, that they're always respectful so that you know that your feedback is not necessarily about the speaker and their personality, but more about the speech and the actual content or the performance of the delivery of that speech, so it's not interpersonal. I think that when people take it to an interpersonal level and it becomes an intentional insult, that's when our emotional intelligence gets triggered and we become more reactionary in how we respond to feedback. as opposed to being very responsive and actually soaking in the ideas and thinking about whether or not it would be useful to implement any of the strategies that have been offered by the person giving feedback, our reviewers. Finally, and this is my last tip, is simply to be open, both as someone who is giving feedback and as someone who is receiving feedback. Being open allows us to say, I may not agree with your feedback, your opinion on this specific performance choice, but I thank you for your words because I know that without them, I would not be as committed to the performance choices and the content choices that I am bringing to the table. Receiving feedback that is outside of what you agree with offers you an opportunity to prove that you are the expert or the authority on this information. So always at any point, you have the right to say, thank you so much for your feedback, but I don't think it's useful for this specific instance. Powerful, 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 powerful space to be in when you're open to giving and receiving feedback. So the best way to co-create success on our speeches throughout this semester is simply for us to think about how to overcome our anxieties of feedback, why we should be motivated for seeking feedback, and being mindful in how we offer constructive feedback, how we receive constructive feedback. Now, our assignments specifically are going to ask us to think intentionally about both the act of public speaking and the art of public speaking. So when you give your feedback in our upcoming assignments, you should think about and focus on the poppet method and the structural flow of the message itself. But you should also think about the verbal, the vocal, and the visual elements in the delivery and the performance of the overall video speech that you're reviewing. Verbally, what is being said? Can you hear the script? Does it sound scripted? Does it sound conversational? Vocally, how is it being said? Is our speaker thinking purposefully and intentionally about how they want their message to be heard, the sound of it and the shape of it, so that ultimately it leads to the visualization or how things look when you say things. So this is where your gestures and your nonverbals come in. These are 3 key areas for when you give feedback to your peers, where you can be intentional and useful as a reviewer. So think about how structurally we move through the poppet method, and then also how performatively the verbal, the vocal, and the visual elements all come into play. Co-creating success. Best practices for giving and receiving constructive feedback. That was our topic today. I took you through 3 key areas: the fears of feedback, motivations for seeking feedback, and then tips for offering constructive feedback, both in general and on our assignment specifics. I hope you find this information useful, particularly because next week we're going to put it into action. This week you're focused on manuscripted speeches, and so you're working on how to intentionally think about the verbal, the vocal, and the visual performance of the speeches that you're giving. Next week, we'll think about those same elements, but this time from the perspective of the reviewers. So you'll go back through and you'll review the speakers of the day, and you'll think about how you would like to give feedback to the speeches that they have offered us. All right, scholars. Well, I'm going to call it a night. It's already late, and so I'm hoping that I get this out to you all before the wee hours of the twilight and we enter into Tuesday. Looking forward to seeing your work being posted up on the discussion boards. You'll see my work being posted up on the grade book throughout the week. I'll see you all next time.